Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Hive in session. As always, I'm your host, Ben, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Arlen Pettitt from the Northeast Chamber of Commerce. Arlen, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
Cool. Well, do you want to give us a very, very brief run through of what you do, Arlen, and then I'll let everybody know kind of what we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So I'm the Knowledge Development Manager at the North East England Chamber of Commerce. So I look after all of the activity that the Chamber does, sharing information and insights with members. And so for the last year or so, that's all been online, and we've been looking at topics that are around how businesses adapt and become more resilient and sort of evolve with the changing world around them. So lots of interesting topics around things like leadership, management, and the future of the workplace as well.
Well, you talk about the future of the workplace, Arlen, and that is what we're here to discuss today. I think that is probably, if not the most pressing evolution, certainly one of the top two that we're seeing from organizations. So I guess if we start with the big question, I guess, like, what does the future of the workplace look like in your eyes?
Well, I think what we've seen over the past year has been basically an acceleration down a road that we're already on. I think lots of people were already thinking about the power of remote working, the power of kind of flexible working, altering working patterns, and kind of there's been for the last few years lots of talk around well-being and work-life balance and all of that stuff. Which has been great, but there's always been this slight, I guess, hesitance from businesses to really like leap in with both feet, because it's the unknown. There was the cost of getting things set up. There sort of I guess the concern that you'd do something that didn't work and you'd kind of have wasted time and resource. The situation being what it is, we were all forced into trying out, certainly those of us who kind of work in office environments, forced into trying out remote working wholesale. And probably in the space of about a month, we leapt forward kind of 6-7 years in terms of progress in digital adoption. And I mean, that's certainly what kind of the likes of McKinsey, the big management consultancy, have said. They saw a huge step forward in the space of a very short amount of time. And I think what it's done is sort of unlock a whole range of new options for people. So certainly everyone I've spoken to in the last year has kind of thought about this as yes, it's been a kind of temporary thing. It's been something that people have done because of a crisis and managing that, but actually there are some good parts to keep. And having done this, you've proved the concept. You've kind of invested in the kind of resources and the kind of technology you need. So now it's about planning what you're doing next. The consensus seems to be that hybrid working is what people want. It's what businesses are leaning towards, and it's what individuals seem to be sort of requesting or kind of stating as their preference. And that being working part of the time in the office, part of the time at home. So that could look completely different for different people, completely different for different organizations, but that's the general concept, and that seems to be where people are wanting to be. I think there are a lot of other things that will probably change in terms of particularly the office layout and the way people use the space. But I think generally speaking, what we're looking at is a kind of, a shift to some sort of kind of mixed and hybrid model of working where that's possible. So the Northeast doesn't have a massive service sector compared to other parts of the country. We've got a far bigger kind of manufacturing and engineering sector, which means more people have to be present in a particular place to do their job. But even within those organizations, there are job roles that can be done remotely. There are tasks that can be done remotely. And so you start to, I think, see an embedding of that kind of mindset once we're starting to get out of, I think, the crisis stage, which we've all been in for about kind of 14 months now, which is ridiculous to think about. But I think once you start to get out of that and into thinking strategically and long-term about it, you'll start to see businesses thinking, well, how can we make this work best? What are the roles, what are the tasks, what are the kind of things that we can do differently to benefit our staff, benefit productivity, and kind of benefit the business as a whole. So I think we're kind of taking, it's an interesting time because we're taking kind of the tentative steps now towards doing this off our own back rather than because it's the thing that we all need to be doing. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to see how it all pans out. But definitely hybrid seems to be the thing that's emerging above the rest as the model that people are looking at.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I think that, and you heard it, you hear it referred to as flexible working. You referred to as remote working. I feel that we're starting to almost like standardize on the idea of this hybrid working. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a little bit earlier there, Arlen, in that there are certain roles that lend themselves better to being applicable to a hybrid model. And something that I think about is sort of, or do we perhaps risk seeing the gap widening between your kind of blue collar and white collar workers? And I guess, like, have you seen any good examples, or have you yourself kind of done any thinking into ways that businesses might be able to kind of alleviate this potential sort of friction, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's just between the kind of roles where you need to be in the workplace and the ones where you don't. There's also the difference between junior staff and more experienced staff, new people coming into the business. There's a definite risk, I think, of a culture of those being one. So one team being the one who's in all the time, one team being the one who's out all the time, and because they're not seeing each other, there's not that crossover. You don't have that kind of, the sort of accidental talking to each other and you're coming up with ideas, that kind of thing. Yeah. And also there's some definite concerns around, so a few things. So how do you onboard new people? How do you make sure that they are kind of ingrained in the culture and get to know what they need to know, and that they have the kind of, the support they need. Same with junior staff. How do you make sure they develop and that they've got the kind of mentoring and the kind of informal kind of backup that you normally give people when they're new to a role, and then how do you focus on, I guess, development and promotion opportunities for people who aren't in the office? If you could, there's all these risks around falling back on I guess those who are in sight being the ones who you kind of and those who aren't.
Out of sight, out of mind. It's a bit of a risk, isn't it?
And I think you're absolutely right as well that there's potentially another kind of side to this, that's some people get the flexibility and other people don't, and therefore the ones that have it potentially benefit more than those who don't. So I think there's all these kind of new disparities that might come through. There's the kind of fact of the matter is that there aren't that many businesses that have done this whole, like on this scale for any significant period of time. There are a few who've been fully remote. So what they've done is put, and mostly it's sort of tech companies that kind of are doing that. So they've got the technology and they know how to approach it. And what they tend to do is kind of formally put in place the structures to enable what would have been the informal support and kind of exchanging of ideas. So you get, rather than people just meeting in the corridor and having a chat about something, you make sure that time goes in the diary, you make sure that people are invited, you kind of do virtual sessions like we're doing now, and that's the way in which you kind of, your culture of idea sharing happens. And I think there's definitely going to be a role for formalizing those bits and being more proactive about how you support people, how you connect people, than we would have been otherwise. So you can't just let stuff happen, because people will miss out. So you have to be a bit more formal, you have to be a bit more proactive and a bit more kind of on the front foot with it. But I don't think anyone's really done it with the half and half. So if you've got people out of the office and people in the office, how does that work? Because that's a different structure. And then there's how do you make sure that the right people are in the office at the right time? You can't have people setting their own working pattern. And so I want to be in on a Monday, but the rest of my team are coming in Tuesday. So how does that work? And how do you make sure that everyone's kind of in the right place at the right time? So there's a lot more organization, there's a lot more admin. So I think that's the bit that businesses are going to be struggling with, is how do you manage all of that? How do you keep track of it all? And the reality is that there are very few that have done it on a scale where you can learn from them yet. So it's going to be really important over the next sort of, certainly the next 6 months, but the next few years, that businesses that are doing this are sharing how it's going, being really honest and open about what's working and what isn't, talking to their staff, talking to their peers, talking to the community at large, and saying, here's what we're doing, here's what's working, here's what isn't. And therefore, everyone can learn from that. And we all kind of share the information as best we can, and make sure that everyone's benefiting. Because just as we've been in the last year, all working out how to do this style of working together, we're all going to be working out how to do that other style of working together as well. And it's so important that we kind of share what we learn, and share how we're approaching things, and work out what's best.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that sort of that type of information sharing, or kind of like strategic collaboration, it goes beyond competitive advantage, really, because, ultimately, like, you're only really inhibiting or progressing, your own organization by embracing kind of an effective way of incorporating this working model, and it isn't necessarily going to be a one size fits all. You make an interesting point that we have been, for the last 14 months, like, just through necessity, we've been trying to work as if we were in an office, but at home. And now it's like, you can't go back to trying to work as if you're at home and in an office, but from an office and at home. You have to come up with something that works and that makes more sense, and I think that, you make a good point about, in terms of that knowledge sharing, like, being more deliberate and being more intentional in the way in which you bring people together to collaborate. And then, I kind of feel that, like, when you want to do that, like, the big sort of the how do I say this, like, the most obvious counter to that is, well, we're sick of everything being by appointment, we're tired of everything being on Zoom. And for me, it comes back to communication. And if an organization can, I suppose, work with their employees to understand, like, will this work? This is our hypothesis. We presented to you, to what extent would you be bought into this? And therefore, is it something that we can embrace or not? Then I think you stand a better chance, by keeping those comms channels open. And, you made a good point as well. Like, there is going to be an element of trial and error to this, right? Like, nobody's going to have sussed it. Like, I think everybody kind of needs to come together and understand that we're at the very beginning of what, years worth of innovation and steps forward crammed into a year and a bit, so we can't act like we have all the answers. And I don't think there's anything wrong in showing that vulnerability by saying, look, we're on a journey together, and SLT and the wider organization just being like, we're committed to getting this right in a way that works for everybody, but we need everybody to pitch in and have their say, and, I suppose, act in the best interests.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. I mean, some of the stuff you raised there. We had a report out of the Chamber a few weeks ago on the future of the workplace, and what we did was draw kind of contributions from people who had started doing some of this stuff, or people that were experts in different aspects of kind of the workplace environment. So people talking about diversity, the office layout and architecture, commercial property, security, all the different aspects of how you'd kind of approach this. And one of the kind of key threads that came through it was the importance of talking to your employees and talking to your teams, and understanding not just what they said they wanted, but what they actually needed, and also how they understood what you were suggesting. So I think being able to communicate what it is that you're expecting from them, how it's going to work, and trying to understand, I guess, how they want to use the office as well. So one of the sort of themes coming out was that no one wanted to come in and just sit at a desk 9 to 5 anymore. People felt like they could get more done if they were all set up properly to work remotely, felt like they could get more done, more focused, kind of productive time like that. What they wanted to use kind of the traditional workplace for was collaboration and that social interaction bit. And so understanding what types of, as we were saying before, what types of tasks can you do in there? What types of interaction are you after? And then building a space that works for it. So we, two of the kind of contributors to the report, one of them, Benicia Housing, Benicia Homes, who looked at what do their so they've got lots of different teams. They've got people who are out doing stuff on site all the time. They've got people that are customer service sort of people dealing with kind of tenant queries and things like that. But they've got kind of whole set of different job roles, and understanding what each of them were already or previously using the workplace for, and then what they were going to use it for in the future, and what did they want? What was the kind of the kind of preferences that they could draw out of that? So they literally surveyed them. So they spoke to them. They did focus groups. They got a market research agency and another chamber member called MMC in to talk to the teams and understand what they wanted. So they found from that about 2/3 wanted a hybrid model. But if you ask them to kind of tell you what they thought that was, it was different for everyone. So there's a lot of kind of learning to do with that. And then one of the other contributors, GT3 Architects, who there was Meek Simpson, who's one of their kind of workplace specialists, talked about, again, understanding what the actual specific tasks are and building a space and environment that allows you to do that, and going as far as sort of delineating it with different colors, different materials, different acoustic properties. If you've got spaces for people to have quiet calls and spaces for people to kind of scribble on the wall, whatever it is, like you build this whole different environment that's based around what people are using it for and is reflective of that. And so I think there's a really interesting sort of, a really interesting sort of approach to taking it, but you could also see how it'd be really, really easy to get it wrong. If you did it without talking to your staff, without understanding properly, you could build something that no one wanted to be in or use, or bits of it that didn't get used the way you thought they were going to, and all of that. So talking to them and then coming back and doing it in an iterative way where you go, well, okay, we tried that, it didn't really work. We tried something else. And all the while kind of you're dealing as well with people who've been working from home for a long time now, bringing them back into the workplace. You've got to show them the benefit of coming back, and you've got to show them that you're doing it with them in mind, that it's safe, that it's sort of well organized, that everything's been thought through. So there's a whole kind of building of confidence and understanding of the way in which people's sort of working patterns have changed, and so it's going to be absolutely fascinating. But you're 100% spot on that you've got to do it with the team, and you've got to do it saying we don't have all the answers as the kind of people at the top. Mm-hmm. We're working this out with you, and we need your feedback constantly because you're the ones who are actually using this space. You're down there doing it. So tell us what you need. And I think there's going to be lots of lessons to learn from that too. And there'll be things that work for some organizations that don't work at all for others. And it'll be about kind of the right fit for the right business and the right job roles.
Definitely. I mean, what you talk about there, it's almost that it's a design mindset, like you want to launch, you'd launch with your MVP, you would have your user stories, you would get, people sort of using it in its most kind of basic format and understanding, like, does this work for what we need it to do? What's the next evolution of it? And kind of just always that sort of that two-way dialogue. This is what we've done. How are you finding it? This is what we've done. How are you finding it? What changes would you like? Here's the changes we can make, and just on and on and on it goes. I mean, the idea that I think probably one of the most important points you've made here, Arlen, is that if you were to try and embark upon something like this without having people say, you would just end up with something that was there was no use to anybody, in my opinion. I mean, we, in another role, I worked I worked for a software company now, but for like a software developer, and we would kind of help people spec out their projects all the time, and they'd be amazed that once it had got into that kind of design phase and you put it out to people would use it in in almost a completely different way to how the sort of the founder, if you like, had sort of understood. Oh, people will use my app for this, this, and this, and then people just find the one feature they love and use it for that consistently, rather than the whole other 80% of what the app was for. And it's only by having that, as I say, that constant dialogue, that you can look to negate that kind of thing happening, or make sure that you're embracing what's working and then kind of dialing up on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole other podcast, but the idea of also understanding what your customers are expecting from you, and the way that you work and the way that you interact with them is just as important as what the staff want. And I think, I mean, anyone who's got kind of customer service teams who've done stuff all online in the last year rather than on the phone or rather than face to face, that's a big shift for your customers to deal with too, and they might want you to be going back. But that team are quite happy sitting at home now. So there's a another clash there between what people are what people are expecting of the organizations they work with or that they are customers or clients of, versus what you might want. So I think there's that whole extra bit there of understanding what people want. And as I say, that's a whole other podcast. But I think you're absolutely right again that until it's out in the wild, you don't know what this is going to be like. You don't know how it's going to respond. And I think the sort of the underlying message that I'm trying to sort of put across to people is that you can't wish this away now. You can't go back to what was before. And so we all have to adapt, and so we all have to sort of push forward. And that includes those who might think, well, my organization can't do any of this. We need to be in a place and working, because businesses around you will be changing. So the high street will be changing, retail, hospitality, leisure sector will be changing. The way we use town centres and city centres will change. The way people travel will change. So buses and trains and car parking and all the rest of it changes. All of these have an impact on your business. And certainly in the Northeast, it's about, in April last year, about half of us were working from home, or doing some work from home at least. And that's in a kind of a region where we don't have necessarily that much flexibility in because of the job roles, as we talked about earlier. But about 3/4 of Northeast businesses have seen an increase in home working in the last year. And about a quarter of those think it's going to stay permanently. So you're still talking about, even if that's the limit of it, a really significant shift just in the wider kind of ecosystem. So there is going to be an impact for people. There are going to be things changing. There are going to be people who don't want to do the commute anymore. There are going to be just generally, your clients will want to speak to you on Zoom rather than face to face. You're going to have the ability to deal with that. So even if you don't think it's for you, you've got to pay attention to it and keep a good eye out on what's happening and the expectations of your staff and the expectations of your clients and your customers. So it's going to be a big shift, I think, for everybody, but a really interesting one, and potentially one that lets a lot of businesses grow, a lot of businesses be more productive, and the region as a whole really benefit if you can draw in investment, jobs from elsewhere. You can save time and money. You can work better with clients around the world because everyone's more familiar with the technology. So all of it is potentially really beneficial thing for us, but we need to make sure that we're adapting to it, supporting all the businesses that are having a particularly rough time of it, and really trying to make the best of it rather than wish it all away. So I think there's that's my message definitely for people is you've got to pay attention to this and think about how it's going to affect you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it is important advice, but ultimately, I think a very positive undertone to everything that we've talked about on this particular session. Let's call it, Arlen. So yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. But look, thank you very much for joining me today, and look forward to getting you back on and maybe talking about a bit more about how it impacts customers and stuff like that.
Absolutely, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this Hive in session. See you in the next one.